in everything that I had planned or wanted to happen, ultimately, this year brought me to see all the things that I already have.
Welcome to Thriving in the Wild. I'm Taylor Stern. I'm sharing what happens when you step into your vulnerability, face the hard things, celebrate your journey, and giving you your weekly reminder that no one has it all figured out. It's time to thrive. Let's go. All right, we have big news for you today. It just so happens to be December 1st, which of course means that we have 31 days left of 2020, and it also means that it is Alex Stern's birthday. So we had to celebrate accordingly and have her on to talk all things 2020 because she is very insightful and I always love her view of life. So today we talk about what we've learned in 2020, the things that helped us get through, and most importantly, the lessons we're taking into 2021. Take a listen. Happy birthday, Aldabal.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a celebration.
It is a celebration, and December 1st is your birthday, if you didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Every year,
the day you were born. And what's always interesting to me about that day is that it is the first day of the last month of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Sometimes I don't know if I'm making sense.
Well, it's a special month, I think, because it's a month where you're looking backward, but it's also preparing you to look forward. So it's very introspective.
It is an introspective month, so I'm glad I could have you on this episode because I want to get introspective about 2020.
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
Let's talk about the things that we've learned, the things that helped us get through, and then what we're going to be taking with us into 2021.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so things we've learned. Let's start there. I would want to ask you right now, what is the biggest lesson you've learned in 2020?
I think it's that I started the year with all of these ambitions in mind. I mean, I had a music project that I was putting out. My life was pretty much scheduled week by week until October of this year. And then when the pandemic happened, I kind of felt like life spun around and what's happening, and I had everything planned. So I'd started in one mindset of this is planning and I'm going to do all these things and get this done. And I ended the year with a complete new understanding that my word of this year was gratitude. And that in everything that I had planned or wanted to happen, ultimately, this year brought me to see all the things that I already have and things that I'm so grateful for and that are so unattached to external things, external validation, external successes. Like this year when everything fell apart, the things that stayed, I just clung to and was so grateful for. Family, true friends, health, safety. And so this year taught me to really define my year with gratitude.
Yeah, I always felt like you were a grateful person before, though, but you just think it enhanced that.
Yeah, I think it helped me just stop saying it, but really feel it. Because we always say, oh, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. But this year, when life was bringing all of us to our knees, I felt grateful.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've heard this too, but I've heard a lot of people say, oh, the pandemic is the great equalizer to people. But actually, I would disagree in some semblance. Now, we're all experiencing the pandemic, but my word of the year, if you're talking about words, would be perspective. Because at times when I did feel like, oh, we're all going through this, and I would hear about someone's story about, they just lost their job or something horrific had happened to their family. And then you realize it's not an equalizer. Some people are dealing with things that are much more challenging, much more difficult to process.
That's so true.
And that doesn't mean that you can't empathize with yourself and what you're going through, but it would always ground me a little bit. Like, because everyone kept saying, oh, it's the equalizer. We're all in the same boat. No, we aren't. There was also a big lesson I learned in addition to that. And I love this quote. I've said it a million times. And I felt it differently before this year, but it was the one, and I'm going to butcher this, but it's like the one quote that says, be kind, for everyone's fighting a battle you have no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
is that not more true than ever? I mean, I have some girlfriends and just some friends, guy friends, who are going through things that they may have kind of told me about or mentioned, but I don't know how they're really processing it. I don't know what's really going on behind closed doors, And I remember feeling that in a different way when Dad had first gotten his diagnosis and we didn't really tell anyone. And I was like, man, if I'm going through this, what are other people going through?
Yeah, I think this year especially, it's been a huge kind of awakening of realizing that we're all experiencing mental health in a different degree than any of us ever have before.
Yeah.
And that's been something I think that's been brought to my attention as well as yours is, being there for friends right now that are really struggling with either depression or anxiety. I personally have felt anxiety this year that I didn't know that I would ever confront. And I think that's something that's been incredibly helpful this year is really, making sure that I was reaching out to people if I was having a hard day, and I think that too has instilled a greater sense of community.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I talk about self-care, because I've been talking a lot about it on the podcast and self-help, I don't mean that in a selfish sense. I really don't. I mean it as, I think the quote, and you've told me this first. Let me start over. You've told me that before. Is that when you are taking care of yourself, you can help take care of others. And that was vital this year. And so as we're talking about mental health and different things, therapy and different things I've stepped into on my own, I really started traveling into that or exploring that, whatever you want to say, in 2018 and 2019. So it's not that I felt completely equipped to handle 2020, because I think if you had told anyone at this point last year, they'd be like, no way, that's never going to happen. But what I mean is, like, because I had already kind of set that foundation.
Yeah.
Okay, here are my grounding techniques. Here are things that work for me. One big difference between you and I is I love to write things down, get it out of my head. Okay, when I'm feeling so overwhelmed, so anxious, like I can't control anything in my life, I write it down, and then I try to personally find a solution to that, such as, okay, finances are really stressing me out this month. All right, I need to set a budget. I've never really done that before, but, maybe I need to do this to feel more control, quote unquote, to that. And so that's kind of one thing that really helped me is the lesson I learned this year is like, set yourself up for success, because you never know what's going to happen. We don't know what 2021 holds, but setting yourself up where it's like, okay, when I feel these things, let me first acknowledge it, then let me process it, let me, handle it in the way that fits right for me, because again, I told you I like to write, you don't.
Yeah, I feel like I'm more of kind of I like to vocalize it with someone, kind of talk it through with someone I trust, whether it's like a therapist or you or a friend that I really trust, and for me, that helps.
Yeah, maybe that's because I suppress more of my emotions, that writing it feels like I can still handle it, but it's out of my head. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because suppressing things is real.
Oh, yeah, and I think we each deal with different ways to cope, whether it's with anxiety or depression or anything. And I think it's the biggest thing is I think each way that someone handles it is valid.
Valid, and meeting people where they're at.
Yeah.
Because as I mentioned before, 2018 and 2019 were the first kind of years that I stepped into understanding who the heck am I? Why am I feeling these emotions that I've never felt before? And it all stems up from a multitude of things that have happened in my life. But I think it's meeting people where they're at. I know that at times you and I fought or we'd get in arguments and you were like, no, this is what it is. But I wasn't there yet. And I've seen that a lot with some different people in my life is like, okay, I'm going to meet them where they're at. I know how I handle this. They don't understand that yet for themselves, and not because they're at a disadvantage or anything. We're just all at different points of our lives.
Yeah. And I think also not only is it other people having the willingness to be patient with us, but patience with ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing too, is like usually my default is to, if I'm feeling something, it's immediately to address it either within myself or to someone being like, hey, I'm feeling off today, and kind of talking it through. But there were some days this year that there was so much happening externally that I didn't have the capacity to, approach things that, whether it was weighing me down. And so I think that's the thing too, is like giving yourself grace in those moments when you just don't have the capacity. Of course, not ignoring things or suppressing, but I think that's the thing too, is not overstimulating that.
Yeah. So you kind of take us into the next part I wanted to talk about, was what is getting us through. So on those days when you felt like that, I mentioned I was really into writing, getting it out of my head. I'm also kind of a talker too, as you can tell. And I would have conversations with friends. But what are some things that helped you personally get through this year?
I would say, of course, definitely family, being able to be around family as much as possible.
But that's because we're very family oriented.
Yeah, and I think that's we're just a close family in general. But I think as well, therapy has been so key this year. And, I think that obviously everybody has a certain comfortability about therapy or what that looks like in their life. But for me, it's something that is so amazing and has been so healing and comforting. And it's not like I'm having these like prolific, existential crisis seasons, but just having someone who's unbiased to help me zoom out.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that phrase.
That's been monumental this year.
Well, it's funny because, I think I saw a TikTok or something the other day that was like, okay, guys, when did we get all, talking about mental health and sharing all of our problems? And I'm like, what? This is the greatest thing that's happened this year. Because you've seen it a million times and I love it. Fitness and physical health has been paramount for years and years and years.
Totally.
Fitness accounts, everybody who's, hey, show me your workout, especially at the start of quarantine. It was like at-home workouts. And so now we're understanding that you have both physical health that you have to maintain and it should be a priority in your life. And then you have to make mental health a priority in your life. Yeah. And it's not a dirty word.
Yeah, it's not. And it's like, we saw this the other day. I don't know if it was like that Instagram post where it was like, there should be a class in, whether it's middle school or elementary school, where kids are taught about, the beginnings of mental health education, whether it's, if you're feeling sad, what does it mean? I think giving people a basis for understanding.
You and I both have ADHD.
Yeah.
And that's something that you have to understand and cope with. And we both got diagnosed in adulthood, but man, wouldn't have been a saving grace if we had really focused on that when we were younger.
Yeah, because I was going through boxes of papers that Mom had saved from our childhood, and all of the teacher's notes were like, she's an amazing student, but she talks and her focus is awful, and we had great grades because we both worked so hard.
Yeah.
But I remember having zero ability to stay focused, oh my gosh, I'm doing my math homework. Oh, wow, that's a really cool rock. I'm going to go look at it and then look up what kind of rock it is. And then, oh, dinosaurs.
I always thought, in my head, I was like, oh, it's just because I'm a procrastinator. I used to always identify myself as a procrastinator.
Yeah.
But I wasn't a procrastinator. I just couldn't get the focus down.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I can't sit here and write this essay for 2 hours and do it because I have 14 other things on my mind. I want to go talk to my mom. I want to go do X, Y, and Z. Oh my gosh, I have tennis. It was like it wasn't that I was procrastinating anything because I always felt very organized and ahead of it, but my ADHD was out of control. And I'm such a hyper person in general.
Yeah.
But having that as a younger person, I think I'm so excited for the generations growing up now. And I know that it is hard and they're experiencing 2020 at a very impressionable age.
Yeah.
And I'm, just hoping the best for them that they're going to get through. But how cool that they get to grow up in a generation now where mental health is a focus and is a priority.
Yeah. Because I think, too, both of us have had friends that, unfortunately, they didn't have support systems, and we've watched them struggle through whatever they're going through alone. And I think especially those, this generation of kids having the awareness of how to show up for people, and how to
do you
have
show
empathy.
up for people? What does that mean to you?
I think it's having empathy,
Empathy has been a big word this year, and I think still it has so many different definitions.
Yeah. I think it's about making sure, and going back to what you said, it's making sure that you are filling up your cup, because you cannot pour from an empty well, you know? And I think that the way that you love people, that originates on how you love yourself.
Yeah.
And
I don't think you can really learn to love yourself until you understand your own mental health and give it a little check-in.
Completely until you understand your mental health, until you understand your dietary needs, until you understand your past.
Yeah.
And I think all of that is rooted in just inner work in general.
My good friend Jenna, who will also be on this podcast later, we were having a conversation, and I loved her analogy of it. And she said, going and talking to my therapist is like going to the gym.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't talk to my therapist for a while, it feels like, she used this phrase, and you just have to bear with me. She's like, I get a little soft. Mm-hmm. And not soft in emotion ways. She's like, if you're trying to compare it to working out and you haven't worked out in a while, you feel a little soft.
Out of shape.
A little cushiony. Out of shape. That's a better word. Thank you. And I just loved when she said that, because I think we can all understand that. It's like,
definitely.
Oh, you know what? After the holidays, I haven't worked out. I'm a little cushiony. I got a little cushion. But when that's the same for your mental health. Completely. It's like, go to your therapist. And there are different things. Like Alex and I always do this. We're always like, oh, this is something I need to write down to talk about over the next.
Yeah.
And that's a true thing. Like, we have so many complexities as human beings.
Yeah.
We almost don't give ourselves enough credit for that.
Well, and I think that's the thing this year, the way to cope is really like letting yourself, I don't know if it makes sense necessarily, but swim with the current instead of trying to work against it. And I think this year, whether it was within myself or outwardly, seeing people kind of trying to resist all the change. And then there were people that were like, well, this is happening and I'm going to accept it. And it's not that it's giving up, but it's a sense of like, okay, I have this situation currently happening in my life, and I can either work against it and create more struggle and frustration for myself, or I can say, okay, this is what's happening. I can't do this, or this was canceled, or, for some of my friends, one of my friends is a flight attendant. She lost her job, and she, confronted it in a really amazing way where she just said, this is the current situation. And so she went and got a different job and did that for a few months, and now she's gotten her job back. But I think that's the thing, is like really giving yourself the opportunity to move with the change.
Yeah, change is hard. I felt that a little bit this past weekend, with Black Friday, Small Business Saturday. I know, we've experienced Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday, and it's like I kept thinking, okay, I want to do so much. Oh my gosh, I want to support every small business out there. I want to make sure I get all the Black Friday deals for gifts. I want to, do everything on Giving Tuesday. And I felt so overwhelmed, probably primarily on social media. Mm-hmm. Like, I really wanted to share everyone's business and give them a shout out. But it's like, okay, I also don't want to leave anyone out. So what can I do in this present moment? Okay, I can hold myself accountable, and I can say, all right, just because I don't post somebody on social media or I don't do this, I'm going to personally support all of these businesses and understand that. And I think that's where allowing yourself a little bit of grace, mm-hmm. and this is a big problem I have, is that I always sometimes catch myself doing things for other people, and not for other people in like a generous way. I am generous, but I do things for the validation. Mm-hmm. That's part of who I am. That's something I've discovered through therapy. And that's okay. I used to look at that like it was a really bad thing. Mm-hmm. But it's okay. It's part of who I am. And so checking myself and saying, okay, am I posting this on social media just because I want someone to say, wow, she's so kind and thoughtful and XYZ? Or am I doing this because,
I care.
I really care, and I'm going to really support this person. And
totally.
And so that was something I really had to overcome this year. Mm-hmm. And that, pivoting to the next one and our last topic here, that's something I'm going to take with me in 2021. Because, as I mentioned, I had this foundation, but now recognizing who I am a person who is a people pleaser. I am a person who does things for external validations, like you mentioned. And so understanding that in 2021, how can I better check in with myself? How can I better say, okay, I'm feeling a little bit of depression. I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not happy. Why? And really starting to dig into that with myself is something I'm for sure taking. And I think it's like you said, filling up my cup.
Yeah. I think something I want to take into the new year is just an awareness that I think, and you know this, I'm a very sentimental person. And so with, Dad's diagnosis and, other things like that with our family this year, that was really monumental for me to kind of work through that, and how to love someone and support them and not grieve them before they're gone. And I think in a lot of moments I anticipate bad things happening because of anxiety. And I think that I really want to work through that more in 2021 of being super grateful and present in the moment and not having this anticipation of bad things happening or, and just it's not even, I'm not sure if I'm explaining it correctly. But
no, you are. I was talking, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was talking to a friend the other day and I was like, man, 2020. And they're like, well, who's to say 2021 won't be worse? And I was like, I'm ready though. I felt like, all right, let's go.
Yeah, I want to soak up the present moment. And I think that this year has definitely equipped me with some really good practice of staying present. But I think that's something in the new year that it's things are going to change, bad things happen, and we get to decide whether we're soaking up the present moment and the good times that we have right now instead of wasting it worrying about what will happen, and I think that's something I'll always work on. That's something I want to say as well is, we learn these lessons, but none of us are finished products.
No.
We're always becoming.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, thank you so much. Let's go eat some funfetti cake now.
Thanks, sister.
And appreciate you. I know you'll be back on and you might have a few of your own episodes. Who knows? Who's to say?
Maybe
we
Judy,
don't know what's going to happen.
Judy, your dog, or my cat Karen will also come in for a guest episode. We don't know.
We don't know. All right. Well, thanks, Al.
Thanks, Tay.
Hey, are you loving this show? Well, I'd love to hear from you. Head on over to your podcast app, scroll down to where it says ratings and reviews, and I'd love to hear your thoughts with a rating and review. Your words might just be what the next person needs to tune in and turn their purpose into passion.